silence. Not the calm silence of cold dawns or forgotten libraries, but the one that only exists in the immediate aftermath of a scream, when even the air seems unable to move and time holds its breath along with everyone on board. The fuselage of Atlantic Airways Flight 417 vibrates with a sharp hiss, a kind of metallic groan, as if the plane itself were in pain. At 36,000 feet, above the vast, dark indifference of the Atlantic, time no longer moves. It burns. The heat in fire started small, almost shy, back there in the galley, hidden among aluminum trays and wires taped together with thermal insulation. But, like every tragedy worthy of its name, it didn't stay small for long. In less than 2 minutes, the flame multiplied like a living creature, twisting through the inner walls, licking at insulation, melting plastic components, spewing black, acrid smoke. The stench of burning plastic filled the cabin even before. The first scream broke out, blending with the warm smell of coffee that someone was still holding, stunned, unaware that there was no longer any reason to drink it. Now the captain presses the intercom button, his voice swallowed by the chaos, spreading like an invisible tide. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated, stay calm. But you and I know, don't we? There's no way to stay calm. Close your eyes if you want, just for a second. Imagine yourself there, sitting, strapped into your seat, hearing the dry snap of metal twisting under the heat of the fire. Do you feel the heat? That smell I can't even describe, a mix of burning wires, human desperation, and the cheap perfume someone put on this morning, not knowing it would be their last? Don't move yet, because there, in seat 17A by the left window, he sits. Michael Sanders, 42 years old, a hydraulic systems technician at some factory in Ohio. No military training, no special skills, just an ordinary man who, 2 hours ago, was lazily flipping through the safety manual, chuckling quietly at the improbability of ever needing to follow those instructions. Now the oxygen masks drop from the ceiling like metallic snakes, and improbability has turned into routine, into the present, into urgency. The flight attendant who, minutes ago, was offering orange juice with that rehearsed smile is now screaming for help, her eyes wide in terror at the flame dancing dangerously near the rear door. Back there, heat is no longer just a sensation, it's a wall, a monster roaring without a sound. Michael looks around, passengers trapped between panic and paralysis, trembling hands trying to reach the masks, eyes searching for any authority, any salvation. He helps the elderly woman beside him almost automatically, adjusting her mask's strap as she murmurs something between desperation and prayer. And it's in that small, seemingly irrelevant gesture that something inside him awakens. The whole cabin shifts into survival mode. Children crying, a man frantically trying to open the overhead bin, desperate for God knows what, while the fire threatens with terrible patience to spread even further. Up front, Captain Megan Harris, 39, experienced 4 emergency landings under her belt, grips the yoke tightly as she watches the panel start to flicker like it's possessed. Mayday, Mayday, Atlantic 417, declaring an emergency, fire on board, requesting vectors to the nearest airport. The response comes garbled, fragmented, like the hopes of those listening. Turn, 210, Azores, 450 miles. The calculation is simple and brutal, 450 miles to the nearest island. Ditching in the ocean is practically a death sentence, even with inflatable rafts, even with life vests. There are no helicopters that can reach this part of the Atlantic in time. No ships nearby. No one. The heat in the cabin is becoming more than discomfort. It's becoming a presence, a threat, a sentence. One passenger faints, another starts pounding frantically on the window, as if it could open, as if the air outside might somehow save someone. Michael feels sweat trickling down his neck but keeps his eyes fixed on the rear, where the flames sneak forward, deviously. He knows hydraulic systems. He's seen industrial fires, pipes exploding, valves failing. He understands, with the cold clarity that only those who know structural fragility possess, that the fire isn't just burning plastic, it's compromising vital aircraft systems. And then he stands up, against all instructions, against every instinct of self-preservation. A flight attendant tries to stop him, her voice shaking with fear. "Sir, please, sit down." But he answers without raising his voice, just with the calm of someone who's already decided. If I don't go, no one will, and he goes. The aisle feels narrower than before, as if the air had shrunk. The fire crackles, sensing his approach, like a beast aware of its enemy. Two flight attendants fight with extinguishers, small jets of foam against a living wall of flames. Michael grabs one from the trembling hands of a flight attendant, aims precisely at the source, licking the electrical panel joint, diverting the flames from a cable that, with absolute certainty, powers the rudder control system. He's not a hero. He doesn't even think of it that way. He just knows that if that cable fails, the rudder is lost, the plane stalls, and then it's over in seconds. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Megan looks at the panel and realizes, with that terrible lucidity only captains know, we're losing the stabilizer. The plane jolts violently, a lurch that sends cups, bags, tears flying. A child screams, and the mother throws herself over them, as if her body could be a barrier against fate. And you? What would you do now? Sit, waiting for instructions, blindly trusting the system. Or get up, as he did, to face the fire, not knowing if there's any real chance of victory. You don't need to answer now. Just keep the question with you. Michael manages to contain part of the fire, smother some of the flames, but the air is saturated with smoke, unbreathable. Coughing, his lungs burning, he returns to the cabin's middle, where a woman sobs, clutching a rosary so tightly her knuckles seem about to snap. The captain decides, with the necessary coldness, continue to the Azores. Her voice echoes over the intercom, thick, almost resigned. Ladies and gentlemen, we're attempting the nearest airport. Please fasten your seatbelts, stay calm. But there's a detail no one hears, a phrase whispered only to herself, like an epitaph. And pray. The fire hasn't been completely extinguished. The smell still lingers, the heat still pulses through the walls, and systems continue to fail, one by one, like soldiers falling in a silent battle. Michael returns to his seat. The elderly woman beside him grips his hand without saying a word. Up front, Megan adjusts the route. 15 degrees south, seek a stable altitude, maintain hope, even if faint. The ocean below is a black mass, featureless, merciless, without witnesses. And as the cabin quiets slightly, lulled by a few minutes without visible flames, Michael knows with the brutal precision of a technician, it's not over, not even close. It's just the beginning of the chaos. Because the temperature in the rear panel keeps rising. And out there, beyond the darkness, there are still 450 miles of absolute nothingness, where no one can hear screams, where no one can help, where the only thing left is to keep going. 1 meter, 1 second, 1 breath at a time. The silence that followed the initial containment of the fire was not one of relief, but of suspension. Like the pause in a breath before a scream. The plane, that wounded giant, followed the course toward the Azores, slicing through the Atlantics. Darkness with the precision of someone with no choice. But inside the cabin, no one believed in the illusion of control anymore. The air remained thick, impregnated with the bittersweet stench of extinguished smoke and the acidic sweat of hundreds of bodies compressed by tension. Michael sat still, his breath labored, his heart racing not from the physical exertion of fighting, the flames, but from the brutal clarity that it was far from over. He knew, more than he wanted to admit, that the fire, even seemingly smothered, had left invisible scars on the aircraft's systems, and those scars were like fractures in an already broken bone. One wrong move, and everything would shatter for good. Captain Megan kept her voice calm on the intercom, giving instructions that sounded automatic, procedural, as if routine could overcome catastrophe. But anyone looking at the panel in front of her knew that failures were multiplying with the persistence of a terminal illness, compromised pressurization, degraded hydraulic systems, temperatures in the rear compartments rising again despite all efforts. And then, in the midst of that tense interval, a slight, almost imperceptible vibration rippled through the cabin floor. Not the kind of turbulence that knocks down luggage or spills drinks, but an intimate, structural shudder, as if the aircraft's very spine had trembled in protest, Michael noticed first. He looked to the side, at the panel above the seats, where a light blinked briefly, then went out like a hesitant wink. And then, as if hell itself decided to announce its return, the smell of smoke intensified again. This time, not from the rear, but from the front, near the divider separating the passenger cabin from the cockpit. The youngest flight attendant, Rebecca, the same who had tried to contain the fire in the back, noticed it too and, without hesitation, ran towards the new source. Passengers started to panic, some standing, others screaming for her not to go, but Rebecca didn't hear, or chose not to, because there are moments when the body moves before the mind has time to ponder. She knew that if that fire advanced, it would hit the cables near the cockpit, and then not even the best captain in the world could keep that beast in the air. Michael tried to get up impulsively, but a trembling hand grabbed his arm. The elderly woman beside him, wide-eyed, silently begging him to stay, as if his presence was the only anchor left in the logic of that nightmare. He stayed, just watched, helpless as Rebecca crossed the aisle, holding the extinguisher with the determination of someone who understands there are battles you can't win but must fight anyway. She opened the divider and disappeared partially behind it. And then came the sounds. The sharp crack of a panel, breaking, the high-pitched hiss of an electrical system shorting out, and the scream, brief, stifled, human. And then nothing. For a moment, just the obsessive silence of the fire doing what it knows best. Are you hearing that? Can you imagine this moment? That instant when everyone in the cabin realizes, without anyone needing to say it, that Rebecca won't be coming back? That there, in that narrow aisle, she chose to give her body so others could have a few more minutes of sky under their feet? You don't have to answer now. Just keep that image because it will come back when you least expect it. Captain Megan realized the same thing everyone else did. She looked through the cockpit's side mirror, saw the contained fire but also saw the void Rebecca left. She took a deep breath, gripped the yoke even tighter, and did what she had to. She announced with the voice of someone who knows every word weighs a ton, that the fire is once again under control, but the situation remains critical. Michael couldn't take his eyes off the divider that now hid both the flame and the sacrifice. His chest felt compressed not just by the thinning air, becoming more noticeable, but by the stupid, irrational guilt of knowing that if he'd moved earlier, maybe, but there's no time for regrets. The cabin slips back into a state of tense paralysis, passengers holding hands, some crying quietly, others just staring at the floor as if they could find there an answer, an exit, an excuse. Captain Megan makes new calculations. The flight autonomy is dangerously low. The fire didn't just consume materials, it affected the auxiliary tank's integrity. The fuel, which should have been enough to cross the Atlantic comfortably, now becomes a sentence, executed mile by mile. Megan ponders, assesses, decides. Continue. There's no other rational choice. Ditching means everyone dies. Trying for the Azores still offers a chance, however small. She announces it, this time less formally, almost like speaking to an old friend. We're 300 miles from the Azores. Tighten your seatbelts. Stay strong. Michael closes his eyes for a moment, not to rest, but to organize his thoughts, to avoid succumbing to the panic growing, voracious, like the very fire they just contained. He remembers the factory in Ohio, the hydraulic systems he supervised, the days when a stuck valve just meant a few extra minutes of work, never the difference between life and death. Now, everything is different. Now, everything is essential. The structural tremor returns, this time stronger, ripping screams and knocking down luggage. A child is thrown partially from the seat, but Michael instinctively grabs them before they're hurt. The mother thanks him with a silent look, more eloquent than any words. And then, amid the chaos, a new alert on the panel. Abnormal temperature in the front compartment. The captain looks at the co-pilot, both exchanging that look only those who've spent years in the cockpit know. The look that says, without saying, time's up. Megan picks up the intercom, breathes, and says the phrase no one wants to hear, but everyone must. There's a chance we won't make it. We're doing everything possible. Prepare yourselves. And then, as if the very sky wanted to add its dose of cruelty, a violent turbulence shakes the plane with the brutality of someone wanting to remind them that here, in the middle of nowhere, the power belongs to the elements, not to humans. The lights flicker, the cabin plunges again into screams, and Michael feels, more than sees, that the next part of this story won't be about containment, but about pure, raw survival. The plane, that wounded giant, keeps moving forward, but everyone inside already knows it's not just the metal falling apart, but also the illusion that someone, somewhere, still has control. The fall didn't come as a sudden shock, but as a slow surrender, like a body giving in to sleep after days of insomnia, like the quiet certainty that there's nothing more to be done but to let go. The fuel ran out 20 minutes earlier than expected. Consumed not, only by the long journey but by the accumulated failures that demanded detours, corrections, resistance against the fire. The hydraulic system finally went silent, not with a bang or an alarm, but with the definitive quiet of something that has already done all it could and now watches, from a distance, the inevitable outcome. Captain Megan took a deep breath. One, last time, adjusted what little she could of the mechanical yoke, and did what only those who live in the sky know how to do. She committed to a controlled descent, to the attempt to turn the impossible into something less tragic, to transform the fall into a landing, the end into an interlude. Michael gripped the edges of his seat tightly, not out of fear, but to stop his body, in a last reflex, from trying to escape the reality already set. Beside him, the elderly woman he had helped earlier now prayed, not for salvation, but for acceptance. Outside, the ocean stretched open like an infinite steel blade, silently awaiting impact. And you, have you ever thought about what you'd do if you were here, right now, at this exact moment, with the fuselage vibrating, masks hanging limp, and the sound of the water rising like an ancient roar, with no time for regrets, no space for illusions? The descent accelerated. The captain's voice rang out one last time. Calm, steady, as if death held no power over her. Brace for impact. And then, like a blunt punch, the fuselage tore through the ocean's surface, breaking apart partially. The metal groaning under the brute force of the water, the windows exploding into shards that were quickly swallowed by the cold foam. Die Kuhn, cabin filled with screams, with water, with chaos. Michael unbuckled his seatbelt, not because he wanted to, but because the water was already rising to his chest and pulling him toward the ceiling that was now the floor, and the floor that was now an abyss. He swam, or tried to, while helping to unbuckle the elderly woman who, trapped by fear and her belt, couldn't move. He freed her, pushed her upward, toward the light still filtering through the ruptures, while the sounds around them blended into a single, deafening note of desperation. Outside, on the semi-submerged wings, the inflatable rafts began to deploy. But the sea is no generous friend. The waves pounded hard, the wind shredded words meant to be orders, hands clutched at pieces of fuselage, hope boiled down to minutes, to seconds. Michael surfaced, pulling the woman with him, saw the raft a few meters away and swam, with the strength he didn't know he had, with the silent certainty that this was the only movement left that made sense. Behind him, the plane sank slowly, like an exhausted giant, like a wounded titan finally lying down, never to rise again. The water's cold was piercing, like needles driving through skin to the bone, stealing strength from his legs, making each stroke harder than the last. Some passengers screamed, others didn't even have the strength for that. Michael saw a child trapped among the wreckage, the small body being pulled by the treacherous current forming as the fuselage sank. Without thinking, he dove again, feeling his chest burn from lack of air, grabbed the child by the shirt and, with an almost superhuman effort, pulled them to the surface, where a flight attendant was already trying to organize those still able to swim. He passed the child over without saying anything, just confirming with a look that they were alive, and kept going, more exhausted by the second, but unable to stop. On the raft, Captain Megan, wounded with a deep cut on her forehead, but alive, was giving instructions, her voice still firm, still a captain, even though the sky around them was a gray, indifferent mass, even though the Atlantic's cold threatened every heartbeat. Michael pulled the elderly woman into the raft, panting, exhausted, and there, surrounded by strangers, by survivors, by eyes carrying the same mirror of trauma, he sat, looking out, at the empty horizon. A man across the raft, still in shock, started mumbling disconnected words, trying to understand, trying to deny, trying to escape, even though there was nowhere left to go. Michael grabbed him by the shoulders, locked eyes, with him, and said without anger, without haste, "We're alive. That's all that matters now." And then he realized, not just that he had survived, but that he had changed, that he had discovered in practice what philosophy books say in polished words, that destiny isn't something you choose, that what's beyond your control must be accepted with the serenity of someone who understands that it's not events that define us, but how we react to them. Deep down, everyone knew they could have died there, in that impact, in that freezing water, in that starless night, and yet they chose to act, they chose to fight, they chose not to give up, Stoicism is not a philosophy for those who fear chaos, but for those who look chaos in the eye and say, "Do your job, and I'll do mine." Maybe that's what I called transcendence. The moment when an ordinary man rises above fear and finds, in the right action, in silent courage, his purest virtue. Michael closed his eyes, not to escape, but to give thanks. Not to a god, not to blind luck, but to the clear awareness that he had fully lived that moment, that he hadn't held back, that he hadn't let fear make his choices for him. And you, if this happened to you, now, today, on this trip, in this routine that always repeats the same, what would you do? Would you run? Freeze? Or would you get up, like Michael did, not out of heroism, but because there's simply nothing else to do but act? Think about it. Not now, but the next time you're thousands of feet above the ground, trusting your life to people you've never met but who dedicate their days, their nights, their years to the silent mission of keeping the impossible working, keeping mankind flying. This is a tribute, sincere, necessary, deserved, to all those who live aviation, pilots who cross storms, flight attendants who face emergencies with the calm of those who know every gesture can save a life, mechanics who, invisible, ensure every bolt does its job, controllers who guide voices and routes in the invisible dance of airspace. To you, who turn the sky into a path. To you, who, even knowing the risks that flying carries, get up every morning to face the unknown with professionalism and dignity. This tribute. The sea, little by little, calmed down. The distant sun began to tint the horizon with a pale orange, and in the distance, finally, a silhouette appeared. The rescue helicopter, cutting through the mist, coming not as a miracle but as the realization of what is possible when courage meets the right action. Michael lifted his eyes, smiled faintly, and knew, with unwavering certainty, that life, like flight, is a permanent risk, but that living is always about continuing, even when everything seems to be over. The helicopter hovered over the raft. Ropes were lowered. The first passengers began to be hoisted one by one, while the waves, now less fierce, cradled what was left of the group. When his turn came, Michael gripped the rope tightly, feeling every fiber of his skin cut by the strain, but also by the memory. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The plane, that thing that could have been his grave, now rested at the bottom of the ocean, along with the fears he refused to let decide his story.